What's up guys, DC here with another repair video. Today I'll be taking you out to the field to repair a broken rolling gate. Here are a few pictures the client sent me about the project. Based off the pictures, we can assume the client wants the two pieces welded together, but either way we try and prepare for the worst. Today I'll be taking out my 110 flux core welder along with my 220 volt MIG welder because I'm currently running low on CO2. And just in case I do, I have that as a backup ready to go. Apart from that, I'm taking my compressor in case I need my die grinder. My portable work table is always a must, and of course my Anbull bandsaw. I'll be talking about a few tips and tricks that can maybe make you a more efficient and safer welder out on your mobile job. I'll also be talking about a few mistakes I made along the way, and how I could have prevented them or fixed them in the process. If you haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing so. I upload videos of all the welding knowledge I have picked up over the years, and I try and share with new upcoming welders and experienced ones. Thanks for watching and hope you enjoy the video. Now we're on site, I get all my gear prepared and ready to go. Turns out the client built this gate himself and some of the welds failed after accidentally bumping in with his car. I do a quick inspection and try to build a game plan in my head. Always try and figure out what material you're working on, as some metals can be deceiving. Aluminum can look like steel sometimes, and steel can sometimes be stainless steel. In my case, I always keep a magnet in the back of my truck just to be sure. First tip I have for you guys is try and park your work truck as close as you can to the project, if possible. Luckily, the client offered to move his car so I could pull into the driveway. Reason for this is 1, you'll have your tools close by and easily accessible. 2, you won't have to unload everything and carry it to the location. And 3, you have less chance of someone stealing your tools while you have your head down welding or working. Trust me, it happens. So I start off by cleaning up and straightening out all the sections that will be welded. Also removing all the old welds that would just get in the way or leave you with a weak weld all over again. As you can see, there's already reinforcement material within this tubing that will help strengthen the weld joint. This is highly recommended as this will help you not blow through the thin wall tubing, and like I said, it'll help with rigidity, especially if you have to grind out the welds for a smooth finish. Next up, I always try and keep a long straight piece of tubing or angle to help keep my workpieces straight or in place. I turn my machine down to a lower setting and begin tacking all 4 corners on each weld joint. One thing I wish I could have done differently is pre-fit the project into place while it was tacked. I thought about doing so, but I didn't want to risk the tacks or the thin tubing to fail while I picked it up and moved it into place. The gate was at least 15 feet long and pretty flimsy to begin with. If I had a helper holding the other half, I would definitely have done so. But those are the disadvantages of working on your own, and the job must go on. After tacking everything into place, I turn my machine back up to my original setting and start welding it out. When welding out a project you know you're going to grind down the welds after, don't be too concerned about the look of the weld, but pay close attention to how your base metals bond. Your welds will always be stronger than the actual metal you're welding on. That's why they started using welding to build buildings rather than structural rivets. Structural rivets are still used today, but a weld will always have a stronger and more flexible bond. On thin stuff like this, it's hard not to get a decent bond with a decent welding machine and power source. And gas MIG welding just makes it even easier. It's a good process to begin learning how to weld and to weld projects out at a much faster pace. Plus, it's a bit more forgiving when running downhill. Another tip I like to share is be careful when chasing a blowout. A blowout is when you strike an arc and instead of a weld, you get a big ass hole. This will happen more often than not and usually on thinner gauge material or rusted out material. There are many ways to chase a blowout, but the simplest way I can explain is always strike an arc on your weld or tack that is holding up, and always try to let it cool down if possible before striking an arc again. A quick side tip and recommendation are the Selstrom knee pads. If you're often welding on your knees, these are a great product as they are both very comfortable and can take a serious beating with weld and grind sparks. I'll leave a link below if you'd like to check them out. One other quick tip is make sure you tie up loose clothing or hair when grinding. The last thing you want is your grinder to get caught up on something you're wearing. I can tell you from experience, it's not fun, and I guarantee it'll happen to you at least once. So learn the first time because I didn't. If you strike an arc on the base material that is blowing out, you'll sometimes keep chasing until you have an even bigger hole. To avoid this, strike an arc on your already deposited thicker weld material and work your way over until your gap is closed. Poor grinding can sometimes make the metal thinner and cause such blowouts. A good welder should always start as a good grinder, and it's a great skill to learn. Now it's time to flip this project over and weld the other side. Be mindful when working with larger irregular projects, especially in public. Know your limitations and ask for help if you need it. The last thing you need is to hurt yourself, someone else, or anyone's personal property. Here's a view of the last few joints I'm going to weld out, and on the last joint I'm showing, I'm going to hit it with the cutoff wheel to give it a little bit more gap. Here I'm trying my best to protect the client's personal property from my grind sparks with my toolbox and some leather. I know it might not seem like much, but something is better than nothing, and having full-blown sparks hitting that turf is not a good idea. I've spent more than half of my welding career in the shipyards where fire safety is probably, if not the main priority. In the shipyards, there is no way of welding, torch cutting, or even grinding without a fire watch and an approved hot work worksheet. Doing so without either one of those is automatic termination and sometimes banned from working at the shipyards. So just try your best to know where your sparks are hitting. Here, I'm welding this gap a little at a time to avoid any blowouts. Like I said before, don't be too concerned about how the weld looks, but focus on getting a good solid bond. Later, when you grind it out, make sure to tack any pinholes you might have left behind. On thinner gauge material, I like using a 36 grit flapper disc. I know that sounds a bit too coarse, but after a few uses, the flapper gets a little less coarse. If you try and use a 60 grit or higher, you'll just end up digging grooves into your base metal as the flapper wears down. If needed, use a 36 grit to bring the weld down to flush, then switch to higher grit, but as you learn, you'll find out that these 36 grits are sometimes all you need. Now it's time to install the gate back onto the rail track. Once again, be mindful of your surroundings and take your time moving large irregular projects. Here's where I ran into my first but small problem. The gap on the rollers were fitted for the smaller 1-inch tubing and not for the wider 2-inch end post tubing. This is a simple fix of just cutting and re-welding the outer roller, but more work and time for me. No worries. I had a really cool client which made it no issue for me to add a little more extra work onto my plate. That and the roller was bent at an awkward angle, I'm sure from the initial impact. So I cut it off, cleaned off some of the old paint, and welded it back on. One more tip I like to share is to be mindful of your weld leads or electrical cords when working out on a sidewalk or pretty much anywhere. A pedestrian trip and fall can result into a serious injury or even a lawsuit if you don't carry insurance. Always try and keep your lines straight and neat. I know I forgot them this time, but I own 2 large orange safety cones for this specific reason. If you can't cover or secure your work leads, at least try to make the hazard visible to others. As I was rolling the gate on over, I realized a small little bump in the rail. It was just a small little weld that wasn't grinded down. Also, always try to secure a free floating project before working on it, and this goes for high pressure gas tanks as well, like welding gas cylinders or torch cutting cylinders. Here's where I noticed my biggest mistake. I got a warp right between where I welded these 2 panels together. There are 2 ways I could have fixed this problem. One is if I had a torch setup, I would heat up the opposite side of which the warp is facing. That would cause the metal to expand and shrink back into place. 2, I get a cutoff wheel and cut on the actual side the warp is facing. That would free up the warp and let you position it back into place. Then you just weld it back up and grind it down flush. I told myself I would do the latter if I had any functionality issues in the end, but it all worked out good with no issues at all. So I finished welding the roller and I get ready for some test runs. If you haven't heard of us yet, Down and Dirty Welders is one of the few businesses I have created, bringing to you the most underrated down and dirty welders the world has never seen. Give us a follow on Instagram and also here on YouTube. Check out our merch on our Big Cartel website and support a small business today. Thanks. Last little problem was those welds left on the rail tracks causing the gate to jump a little as it went over. Those were not my welds and left over from the previous fabricator, but I went ahead and grinded them down for a smoother transition. The client really took notice in this small detail as they were used to their gate jumping and rattling when opening and closing. Another small job well done. If you like this video and maybe learned something new, please drop a like and consider subscribing for future videos. It would be greatly appreciated and it would help the channel grow. Don't forget to check out my affiliate links below for a few discounts. Also, if you'd like to personally help this channel grow, consider donating to the channel following my PayPal link below. Thank you guys again for watching and listening. Until next time, peace.